Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Today is the second of 2 days presenting NYSERDA's draft of the Carbon Neutral Buildings Roadmap for New York State. If we can go to the next slide, please. This is the day 2 of a 2-day webinar presenting the draft contents of the Carbon Neutral Buildings Roadmap. The purpose of these presentations is for both public review and, importantly, public comment, so that we can include the public's thoughts in our final product. Yesterday, topics included were the impetus for and importance of this work, along with a review of technologies, both current and emerging, that will facilitate carbon reductions in both new and existing buildings. We also discussed the needs of the grid and importance of electrifying while the grid is converting to clean energy resources, and the resiliency needs related to undertaking these actions while the climate is changing. Today's presentation will cover solutions for achieving carbon neutrality by building type, policy recommendations, which are importantly building upon those already presented at the Energy Efficiency and Housing panel, being inclusive of and benefiting those in historically disadvantaged communities, building out the workforce of jobs and boots on the ground who will make this carbon neutral future a reality, and continuing engagement and outreach to the public. We will also close with some real-world case studies of buildings that are actually being built or already in operation that have made carbon neutrality a reality. Next slide, please. Format for today's webinar will be approximately 2 hours of presentations, followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. Due to the large number of participants on the line today, we're asking that questions be submitted through the presentation via the Q&A feature. There will also be an opportunity to provide written comments following the webinars. This presentation is being recorded and will be posted on the Carbon Neutral Building Roadmap webpage next week. Next slide, please. To kick things off for us today, it's my pleasure to introduce John Williams, who is NYSERDA's Vice President for Policy and Regulatory Affairs. Mr. Williams serves as Vice President for Policy and Regulatory Affairs for NYSERDA. Mr. Williams is responsible for providing oversight and guidance of energy policy development for NYSERDA and for New York State. This includes guidance for the scoping plan development for the state's Climate Action Council, and he oversees the Energy and Environmental Analysis Team, providing economic analysis and scientific research to inform policymakers in energy and environmental issues for New York State. Mr. Williams is also the recipient of the 2021 Public Service Leadership Award from the State Academy for Public Administration, and Mr. Williams currently serves as Vice Chair of the Board of Directors for the National Association of State Energy Officials. Please help me welcome John Williams.
Great, thanks, Matt, and good afternoon to everybody. As Matt had mentioned, I am John Williams, Vice President for Policy and Regulatory Affairs here at NYSERDA, and certainly it's a pleasure to be joining you today, and as we learn more about the draft Carbon Neutral Buildings Roadmap and the important framework that it will provide us as we work to decarbonize buildings across New York State. So as we advance the outcomes of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, you know, the decarbonization of buildings is going to be essential. Buildings are a major source of greenhouse gas emissions in New York State. And when we think about that in relation to our charge to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 85% by 2050 and ultimately reaching economy-wide carbon neutrality, buildings are going to be critical in achieving those goals. And as we think about these emissions reductions, we also simultaneously need to address environmental justice, delivering benefits to underserved communities, and ensuring a just transition for workers as we transform the energy systems that power and heat our homes and places of work. Yesterday, you heard from NYSERDA's President and CEO, Doreen Harris, on the importance of the draft Carbon Neutral Buildings Roadmap, and how this document will guide upgrades that eliminate emissions and improve the quality of existing housing and buildings, while ensuring that the new construction for single-family, multifamily, office, and higher education buildings are built to high-performance standards. Equally important are the policy initiatives that the roadmap will lay out, and that will be necessary to realize change in a way that's going to benefit all New Yorkers in all communities throughout New York State. The technology summarized yesterday, both current and emerging, will be employed to drive carbon reductions in new and existing buildings. And at the end of the presentation today, you'll see that technology is already in the market and is readily available. Heat pumps that warm our homes efficiently on the coldest of days, and batteries that augment the reliability of our clean solar power, and smart appliances that digitally interact with the electric utility are all technically viable and in the market. But we do need to bring these technologies to scale. These products are the tools for decarbonizing buildings, and increasing demand for that equipment and the professionals to install them will be creating new industries and new jobs for New Yorkers. In addition to implementing these technologies, we must also understand the needs of New York's grid and the balancing needed as we electrify our buildings while we transition the grid to clean energy sources. As new wind turbines and solar arrays are built, they will be met with increasing demands for clean power for our homes and businesses. This interaction between our buildings and grid will be the primary way for us to decarbonize our building sector. It is also imperative to ensure that our new interactive grid and our buildings are both affordable and equitably accessible to all. And we must move forward with these actions while planning for the resiliency needs that come as our climate continues to change and extreme weather events occur more frequently. But the investments required of utilities to maintain reliability can be managed by concurrent investments in energy efficiency of buildings that will eliminate waste, reduce consumption, and that will relieve stress placed on our shared electric grid. With all of this in mind, today's webinar will focus on a number of things, reinforcing what Matt had identified before. We'll be looking at solution sets for achieving carbon neutrality by building type, policy recommendations, building on the recommendations that were provided from the Energy Efficiency and Housing Panel and the Climate Action Council, specific actions that will include and benefit historically disadvantaged communities, efforts to support New York's workforce, and build a pipeline of skilled workers to support the clean energy industry. We'll talk about this extensive stakeholder engagement and outreach process that the team has already completed to inform the contents of this draft roadmap and what's to come with the release of the final roadmap. And finally, we will show some case studies of buildings that have been developed and are making decarbonization of the building stock a reality. There is a lot of valuable information that will be provided during this webinar, and I hope that you'll be inspired to action. We can and are transforming our built environment, and all of you present today can be part of this transformation. So as you participate in today's webinar, I encourage you to think about the buildings that make up your community now and how they may look in the future. I urge you to think boldly as you envision how transformation can happen in your neighborhoods and communities, how you can be a part of it, and how collaboration with others can help to drive it. And we at NYSERDA are looking for you to bring your perspectives, ideas, and recommendations to the discussion so that we can achieve our ambitious clean energy goals and ensure a brighter future for generations to come together. And with that, I'll turn it back to Matt, who will introduce the presenters for today's sessions. But thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy today's webinar.
Thanks, John. That was a great kickoff and framing for today's discussion. Next slide, please. And one more. Our first speaker today will be Patrick OShea. Patrick is a Director of Market Development here at NYSERDA, overseeing new construction codes, product standards, efficiency solutions, and a number of other things. Patrick will be speaking about solution sets and value proposition for decarbonization. Next slide, please. Patrick will be joined by Kara Carmichael. Kara is a Senior Principal for Carbon-Free Buildings at the Rocky Mountain Institute and is a national expert in decarbonization. Kara leads RMI's Grid Interactive Buildings and Zero Carbon Road Mapping work. Kara brings a background of architecture and engineering with over 20 years of experience working on zero energy and carbon neutral projects across the country, portfolios, and programs. Next slide, please. John Lee is joining us to talk about policy recommendations in the roadmap. John is a contractor for NYSERDA focused on codes, products, and standards. Next slide, please. Michael Duramio. Michael Duramio is NYSERDA's Assistant Director for Energy Affordability and Equity. Michael will walk us through equity and benefits to low-income and disadvantaged communities. Next slide, please. Adele Ferranti. Adele has a current role of Director of Workforce Development and Training at NYSERDA and will describe the strategies for developing the decarbonized workforce of today and the future. Next slide, please. And our last speaker for the day will be Greg Hale. Greg will describe the public engagement process and walk us through a series of case studies showing real-life buildings that are being built and already operational in the world that are already decarbonized. Greg is a Senior Policy Advisor at NYSERDA for Energy Efficiency Markets and Finance and leading our decarbonization work. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's webinar. Again, we ask you to post any questions that you may have or comments in the Q&A section that we will do our best to get to at the end of the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Patrick, next slide, and Patrick will lead us off today.
Okay, Matt, you can go on to the next slide. So simply put, carbon neutral buildings are better buildings. They are inherently more efficient, as well as healthier and safer for occupants, as open flames, combusting gases, gas leak potential, and moisture have been removed from the building. The building also retains more of the heat generated, as much heat is lost when the combustion emissions are being vented. As awareness of these benefits grow, carbon neutral buildings will be easier to lease and command rent premiums. A growing number of experienced design teams and developers are reporting that they can achieve carbon neutral outcomes at little or no incremental cost, with no sacrifice to other building amenities, bringing near-term market potential for carbon neutral new construction to compete with traditional construction at equivalent costs. In the real world, experienced design teams, and we'll show you data on this later today, are already outperforming the cost estimates that we modeled in our design and construction innovation. Oh my God. Just pausing a second there to make sure my video comes on. Sorry about that. While many non-energy benefits, such as health and safety, are known and understood, they are often not well or not at all quantified. Leading national experts expect that the non-energy benefits of carbon neutral buildings are at least equal, if not several multiples, of the energy benefits of the best carbonized solutions. This is an urgent area of future research. Thinking about what happened in Texas this past winter, where extremely cold temperatures and large-scale power outages created dangerous conditions for residents, the work that we do to weatherize and improve the efficiency of the building envelopes would have kept Texans warm under these conditions. This illustrates how important it is to couple efficiency with the electrification measures we are pursuing. Improving the building envelope drives energy and cost saving, but also helps with resiliency when decarbonizing New York's buildings. Next. In our view, decarbonization equals efficiency plus electrification plus grid interactive load management. And so let me just give you a little thumbnail sketch of decarbonizing a building. The first thing that we would focus on would be efficiency measures, including upgrades to the building envelope if needed, ideally to a high-performing building envelope. Then we would electrify the various on-site heating and combustion loads as equipment needs to be installed or replaced. And then lastly, we would install on-site renewables, controls, and storage to enable grid responsive capabilities. You can see some of those in the slide. Co-benefits, next, please. I just want to run through some of the co-benefits of carbon neutral buildings here. 6 key non-energy benefits, and I want to make a specific point on a few of them. So number one, you're able to future-proof your building. Your building would be safe against the changing energy market and the expectation that fossil fuels will become less accessible and more expensive over time. Secondly, you can maximize usable square footage. The electric HVAC equipment generally takes a smaller footprint than existing fossil fuel HVAC equipment, and there are unitized solutions where you can combine multiple pieces of equipment into a unitized solution. Number 3, health benefits. We've mentioned some of the health benefits. There are studies going on right now that really show that these all-electric buildings are much better for people who have asthma and other related diseases. Increased resilience. Weatherization plus solar and storage helps keep the power on and temperatures consistent in the event of a power outage or extreme weather event. Occupant comfort. High-performing building envelopes combined with engineered ventilation systems provide much more comfort than a typical building in New York State at this time. And safety. Reduced risks associated with the aging gas infrastructure. Open flames are eliminated with induction cooktops, and all in all, a large number of co-benefits. Next. There are some challenges. There still is a first cost premium compared to fossil-based fuel systems and a high cost of envelope upgrades. Challenge number 2, cost of fuels is still an issue. The relative high cost of electricity versus the low cost of fossil fuels. Despite the challenges, the rest of the challenges noted below, as I mentioned, the cost data that we've modeled has been exceeded in the actual marketplace, and I'll show that later in the demonstration. We've been sponsoring a Buildings of Excellence competition for a couple of years, and experienced design and construction teams are beating these cost estimates. But challenges still remain. One of the biggest challenges is to get New Yorkers to invest in their buildings at a level that they're not typically doing. And that'll be part of improving the building stock overall. Next slide, please. Managing costs for carbon neutral solutions is critical. And we have multiple pathways that we are supporting to try to drive down cost. So the most effective way to reduce costs in new construction and gut rehab is by using an integrated design process with an experienced team, as well as ensuring pre-allocated design construction budgets to focus on right-sizing systems and minimizing material use. Costs are coming down rapidly, and advanced design teams are starting to report that they can deliver projects close to or with no incremental cost. Despite the good news, it's still a reality for many projects. Key technologies such as fabricated panels, heat pumps, integrated mechanical systems, geothermal system, well field drilling, and windows are likely to reduce in cost due to improved manufacturing and experience with solutions. And NYSERDA plans to invest in those. Some of the concepts used in other industries are just beginning to be applied to the construction industry. Prefabricated panel solutions, economies of scale, and the establishment of a dedicated supply chain to support that. Improved familiarity with these systems can reduce the on-site installation costs and the time on site, which has a major benefit in terms of construction. On the technology cost reduction, the fastest advancing technologies with the shortest projected cost reduction timeframes include integrated mechanical systems, where we believe up to 40% cost reduction can be achieved by 2025, in batteries, where 20% cost reduction can be achieved by 2025 and 38% by 2030. Some of the areas we're not finding significant cost reduction yet include VRFs in induction cooking stoves. I'd now like to pass it over to Kara.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Next slide, please. So we'll dive into the costs for the 4 key building types in the next several slides, starting with multifamily. So for multifamily buildings, we evaluated an all-electric efficient scenario for both new construction and retrofits with gas and oil baselines. So the multifamily building stock in New York is particularly challenging since most of it was built before 1945. And so naturally it has deferred maintenance that also needs to be addressed. But obviously this is a very important sector since it's home to millions of New Yorkers. Next slide, please. So our analysis found that decarbonizing existing multifamily buildings that currently use oil to provide heat, that provides better paybacks than those that are heated with gas. So what we're looking at here is a 7-story retrofit downstate with a cold climate air source heat pump, a code compliant shell, a heat pump water heater, and efficient appliances. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of orientation since many of the following slides have a similar format. So the stacked green bars show the upfront costs, including capital costs for heating, cooling, ventilation equipment, as well as shell costs. The blue and yellow stacked bars on the right show the annual operating costs for a single year. And this includes operations and maintenance, fuel and electricity costs. And for each set of charts, we're comparing a baseline scenario on the left to the upgraded scenario on the right. So doing the simple math here reveals a 22-year payback. These figures do not include incentives or tax credits, which could reduce the upfront costs by about 50%. So in this case, they could reduce the simple payback period down to about 10 years. So prioritizing oil-based buildings, multifamily buildings in the short term, that provides an economically viable path forward based on the capital costs and energy savings that we're finding. Next slide, please. So in this scenario, with a multifamily building that heats with gas, our modeling shows that these are not attractive economically based on today's costs. This does reinforce the importance of reducing upfront costs through technology cost reduction, like Patrick mentioned, and we discussed a little bit yesterday. And lastly, you'll hear it a few times today, but accounting for the co-benefits like health and comfort and resilience and the grid benefits is really critical. And, you know, again, health advantages are especially important with family members with respiratory issues, including asthma and allergies. And the societal healthcare costs due in part to our buildings, that impacts us all. Next slide, please. So as we have discussed throughout the roadmap presentation, new construction and gut rehab projects will have some of the best economics. So this example is an efficient all-electric new construction scenario with a code compliant shell. And upfront costs are nearing parity with conventional gas construction. So we found only a small premium of about $2,000 per unit before incentives. And this upgrade does increase operating costs, but just by a little bit. So overall, this is really good news for new construction multifamily decarbonization. Next slide, please. Actually, next slide, and I'll pass it back to Patrick.
Hi, so let me just briefly explain the data that's in the slide that you're looking at. So we're showing the incremental cost in a percentage on the side, and the incremental cost both before tax credits and incentives. So that would be the current full cost, and then the incremental cost after available tax credits and incentives, and that's the lighter blue. The data represented here comes from 2 rounds of the Buildings of Excellence competition that NYSERDA has been running. It includes projects, low and mid-rise projects from upstate New York, mid-rise projects, low, mid-rise, and 1 high-rise project from the New York City area. As you know, there's quite a difference in the type of construction and the cost of construction geographically within New York. The great news is that a dozen of the projects have no incremental capital cost to build net zero buildings and carbon neutral buildings. Last year's round of the competition, every building winner was an all electric solution. That's just something to point out. Next slide. So with the Buildings of Excellence competition, in addition to the data, we get access to the design teams to understand the solutions that they're applying that are giving them a combination of performance, carbon neutral, and parity at cost. And one of the most important things is really to begin this early in the pre-schematic design to really look at technical solution development and careful selection of the technologies deployed. In addition to designing the building itself, it often takes designing how the building is constructed. So this integrated design build strategy is deployed by many of the teams. Notably, over half of the estimated project savings really came from team and project design strategies, emphasizing the importance of a strong team that leverages integrative design. The buildings that achieved parity did not achieve parity just simply by putting more expensive equipment into a similar building design. I think that's important to note. Next slide. There are many benefits to decarbonizing multifamily buildings, including improved health, comfort, resilience, safety, costs, and grid benefits. The biggest challenge with this building type will be decarbonizing the existing multifamily buildings, in particular, those that are using steam heating. Also, some of the older building envelopes will be very expensive to upgrade and improve their performance. Another challenge that we face in the multifamily sector, also in the some aspects of the commercial sector, are the difference of incentives between landlords and tenants. So there are when we have an owner occupant or a homeowner, they share all the benefits of an investment into the building, but those are split between landlords and tenants in terms of the benefits. And back over to Kara.
Thanks, Patrick. Next slide, please. Okay, so the single family home typology, so that represents residential homes, duplexes, and townhomes that are all common across New York. And so we'll look at 3 scenarios that include both air source heat pump and ground source heat pump technologies, and 2 levels of shell, comfort shell, and then the more efficient code compliant shell. Next slide, please. Decarbonization retrofits of single-family homes with oil heat they're often cost-effective today, even before incentives. So we found that the average homeowner spends 10 years in their home, and the simple payback for this level of improvement falls under that threshold. So this would be a reasonable level of investment for most homeowners. With the single-family home incentives that are available today, that could bring the simple payback down to 5 years. And we found those incentives to be on the order of about $10,000. Lastly, this project will result in improved indoor air quality, better comfort, better resilience, and overall, just a better place to live. And if you're currently heating with oil, it's a very cost-effective upgrade. Next slide, please. So similar to multifamily retrofits, decarbonization retrofits of single-family homes that are heated with gas are not as attractive as replacements if you're heating with oil currently. So in this scenario, replacing an existing gas furnace and making comfort shell upgrades, which in this case we assumed air sealing and adding attic insulation, that results in a higher upfront cost and a slightly higher operating cost. This is a fairly common use case, so I want to peel this back a little bit. So there are 4 moving pieces that are not included in the economics shown here on the slide, but those will bring the cost down in the near term to help this scenario pencil. So the first is incentives and tax credits, which, as we've discussed, could cut upfront costs in half. Second is the cost reduction of installed technologies, as Patrick mentioned, and we discussed yesterday, installation, manufacturing, supply chain efficiencies. And these we found range between 5 and 42% lower upfront costs for technologies by 2025. The third piece is the increasing costs of energy, both gas and electricity in the near future, which will make operational savings more valuable. And then the fourth, really important, is accounting for the co-benefits, health, comfort, resilience, grid benefits. And these will all help make the business case. I would say it's also worth stressing that the economics are highly dependent on the existing conditions of the home. Next slide, please. So this scenario shows an all-electric retrofit to a single-family home with a fairly significant shell upgrade that would bring the shell up to current new construction code levels. So these upgrades with no incentives, they push the payback out to 20 years. So again, when incentives and tax credits and technology cost reductions are included, we expect that payback to be under 10 years. As a result of this upgrade too, the home will have superior indoor environmental quality. It'll have better comfort. It'll have better passive survivability. So it'll provide significant benefits to the family that's living there. One other really important dimension that I want to highlight here, with the deeper level of shell upgrades, this will reduce peak load on the grid. So this will also then reduce grid build out, as Dan Ost presented yesterday. So this level of shell improvement would translate into a 50% reduction in peak load if the equivalent shell was rolled out across all homes, as compared to an electrified home with no shell upgrades. So the reduced capacity requirements on the grid will reduce grid system costs that are borne by all ratepayers. They're borne by you and me and all of us here today. So electrification and efficiency and shell measures are really important, not just at the building level, but also at the system level. Next slide, please. So as Patrick mentioned earlier, there are multiple paths to decarbonization. So this scenario shows the results of a comfort shell upgrade bundled together with a ground source heat pump system. So the prior slide was air source heat pump plus a code shell. This slide is ground source heat pump with a comfort shell, a lighter level of improvement. So 2 slightly different flavors. They have different upfront costs, but they have comparable operational cost savings. So this scenario does include the tax credit, but only for the ground source heat pump system. And as we've modeled it, it provides a simple payback of 10 years, which would make it a reasonable investment for most homeowners, even before incentives are factored in. Next slide, please. So to summarize the benefits and challenges from the single family carbon neutral use case, there are a lot of benefits, similar to what we discussed in the multifamily case. For single family, the challenge is scale and speed. How do we do this at scale within the mandated time frame? So Greg Hale mentioned yesterday that we need to retrofit homes at the rate of 200,000 homes per year. So this is the driving challenge for single family homes. Next slide, please. So the next set of slides, we're covering a few office use case cost scenarios, which apply to both leased and owner-occupied offices. So we'll walk through two use cases, both retrofits, the first showing all-electric upgrade with a code-level shell, and the second showing an all-electric upgrade with a passive house-inspired shell and advanced controls. Next slide, please. So the shell measures are driving most of the upfront cost increase. So this scenario assumes bringing a pre-1980 building, office building, up to current code levels of efficiency, which requires additional insulation and window replacement, which is not insignificant, but it also provides important comfort and productivity benefits. Also, the improved shell and equipment efficiency are responsible for almost all of the operational cost savings that we're seeing here. So without the shell upgrades in an office scenario, utility costs would likely increase since electricity is more expensive than gas on a relative basis. Next slide, please. We found that passive house inspired shells is not yet financially attractive in an office retrofit scenario, but it does support other co-benefits, including increased comfort and productivity. So the costs for the passive house inspired shell include increasing wall and roof insulation, triple pane windows, and aggressive air sealing. So it's a fairly substantial upgrade. I would also note that office buildings have a higher cost to retrofit to passive house levels because they have more glazing, they have more windows, they have a higher window to wall ratio than other typologies. Office buildings, they're also by nature internally load driven, so they're less influenced by a high performance envelope. So I think the bottom line here is that without incentives, cost reduction, or targeted market demand, it may not make financial sense to retrofit an office building shell up to passive house inspired levels. Next slide, please. So to summarize the business case offerings for office buildings, studies have shown that net zero energy buildings can provide strong returns to developers and landlords, including a 3 to 7% higher occupancy rate, 3.5% higher rental rates, and 13% higher sale value. While we have less data on carbon neutral buildings, we believe that they'll result in similar returns, if not better. And important to note also that tenants and occupants also gain the benefits of improved health, comfort, resilience, and productivity. Next slide, please. So I'll walk through two scenarios on higher education buildings, both new construction, one with a code compliant shell and the other with a passive house inspired shell and advanced controls. So improvements in higher ed buildings, they're often driven by aggressive sustainability goals. And what's most unique about this typology is that buildings are often integrated into a campus-wide energy infrastructure that serves many buildings at once, as Greg spoke to yesterday. Next slide, please. So all electric new construction, it has minimal incremental upfront costs and less than a 7-year payback. So given academic institutions often have long asset holding periods, this is really promising findings. Also, if we pan out to the total project cost, the premium for this upgrade for an all-electric efficient new building is less than 1% of the total construction cost of a new project. So this ends up being well below the typical range even of contingency on a project and should be a really strong investment. Next slide, please. So for passive house inspired new construction, the upfront premium is slightly higher. It's less than 2% of the total construction costs. These measures before incentives and tax credits would result in less than a 20-year payback. So according to the Energy Information Administration, the EIA, the median age of educational buildings is 37 years. So this could be a viable investment. I'd also note that compared to offices, the energy demand of a classroom is less driven by internal loads. So in this use type, higher levels of shell is more beneficial compared to office buildings. Next slide, and I'll pass it back to Patrick.
Thank you, Kara. In closing out the section on higher education, I want to highlight a few top-level challenges and opportunities. Beyond the classroom and dorms, many campuses have central steam plants and specialized high-energy buildings such as laboratories. These will be challenging to decarbonize given today's electrification technology and the costs. At the same time, the research, curriculum, and engaged students at these campuses will provide many downstream benefits in both the professional lives of those students and their civic lives. NYSERDA is currently funding a number of projects through our Energy to Lead and Rev Campus Challenge, and an interesting project related to this area is just starting at Syracuse University with some World War II era dormitories. Next slide, please. In summary, we already have a better building for occupants and cost-effective ways of combining heat pumps with improved building envelopes to produce new and retrofit decarbonized buildings. As the applications of ground or water source heat pumps improve in cost and flexibility, we will use more of the latent energy in the earth and water resources to service more of the winter heat load and help balance grid load and cost. From the demonstrations previously covered, we see that innovation in building and construction design can reduce the cost of achieving a high-performance building envelope and reduce the sizing of the equipment needed for heating and cooling. As knowledge and experience is shared, we'll be able to achieve carbon neutral at comparable costs in many building types and projects. Work is still required to achieve the scale that will dramatically lower installed costs. That work includes driving consumer awareness and demand, investing in supply chain and applying world best technologies in New York, removing regulatory barriers and mitigating other risks associated with new approaches, providing incentives, tax credits, and low-cost financing to support more of this work being realized on an accelerated basis. Next slide, please. Additional opportunities to enhance the value proposition include explore financing options and ways to develop business models that bring or use low-cost finance for their products. This would include service models for providing thermal energy, monetizing the co-benefits like reduced healthcare costs associated with occupying a carbon-neutral building or being in a carbon-neutral neighborhood, future-proof buildings so that they will be reliable, resilient, and optimized for a smart, renewable grid. Share back the grid benefits and cost avoidance created by efficient, smart, and flexible buildings. Next, and I'm going to pass the slide show on to John Lee. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. Can I get the next slide, please? To realize the carbon neutral buildings of tomorrow, we have to implement policies that lead to the right balance of regulation and public action that induces the market to make the dramatic transformation of all of our buildings. Next slide. This mission is built upon a legacy of landmark laws and policies to reduce emissions. The Climate Act calls for an 85% carbon emissions reduction by 2050, a carbon-free electricity sector by 2040, and a Climate Action Council to develop and deliver policy recommendations as part of the scoping plan that will enable New York State to reach this goal. The Carbon Neutral Buildings Roadmap laid the foundation for these recommendations with supporting analysis and the Building Sector Advisory Panel has developed and presented to the Climate Action Council their recommendations for the policy directives necessary to reach the Climate Act goals. Those recommendations are largely aligned with the roadmap. Next slide. This policy commitment is no small undertaking and is unlike anything else we as a society have attempted to accomplish. Eliminating greenhouse gas emissions from buildings in New York will require broad systemic changes and new resources to help pay for those changes. Ambitious policies in the form of regulations and codes to phase out fossil fuel use in buildings, enabled by incentives, financing, workforce development, research and development to spur innovation, and public outreach can induce these broad systemic changes. Next slide. The scale of the issue informs the scale of the solutions. As of 2018, the building sector accounted for 115 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Fuel combustion in residential and commercial buildings represent a majority of the emissions, including imported fossil fuels, which means emissions associated with extracting, processing, and transporting fossil fuels that are combusted in buildings. Hydrofluorocarbons, HFCs, used mainly for refrigerants, account for almost all of the increase in emissions since 1990, when they were not in use. These emissions will need to be reduced dramatically even as the use of air conditioning and heat pumps expands. The policy suite of the roadmap can achieve a 30% reduction from the 1990 levels by 2030 and put us on track to meet the 2050 goal. Next slide. The most transformative strategy uses codes and regulatory standards to send a clear market signal, ending reliance on fossil fuels in buildings, phasing in over time. Legislation must be enacted to adopt building codes, equipment standards, and regulations to improve energy efficiency, electrify buildings, reduce emissions, and enhance building resilience. This will take a committed public to support these legislative, regulatory, and programmatic changes. And while these changes will not be easy, without these clear regulatory signals for the market, we will not achieve our critical greenhouse gas reduction goals. These regulations will drive the scale and certainty needed to transform the market and reduce costs. First, we must adopt a highly efficient state energy code. We need to simply stop wasting energy. And codes that incorporate low carbon resiliency solutions, which include on-site solar photovoltaics, readiness for advanced electrical equipment and batteries, readiness for electric cars, and the capability for major energy-consuming appliances, batteries, and cars to run and charge in coordination with the utility. Ultimately, we need to move to an all-electric code for new construction, starting in 2025 for single-family homes and by 2030 for multifamily and commercial buildings. The state codes should prohibit gas and oil equipment for space conditioning and hot water in all new construction and gut rehabs. The technologies to do this for new construction are commercially viable today. Next slide. Codes and standards must be adopted that will drive substantial emission reduction in existing buildings. The state can continue to demand the best of new construction, but the majority of emissions are attributable to the buildings we have today, most of which are likely to still be here in 30 years. The policy here addresses the sale and installation of efficient and zero-emission equipment when replaced at the end of existing equipment's useful life. By targeting replacements at end of life, costs are contained by leveraging the natural investment points in the life cycle of a building or piece of equipment. The state will need to enact emissions-based standards that prohibit replacing space conditioning and water heating equipment with fossil fuel new equipment. This approach has precedence in the transportation sector, where governments have adopted 100% zero-emission vehicle sales regulation by 2030 or 2035. Here, the timing of the policy calls for 100% zero emissions appliance sales by 2035, starting with equipment replaced in single-family homes in 2030, moving to all building sizes and equipment by 2035. The timing of the specific milestone dates proposed here were conditioned by market readiness, grid readiness, and the greenhouse impact over time relative to the 85% reduction goal. Next slide. For building owners today, better information in the market drives better decisions. The merits of requiring the measurement of building energy use and making that information available via disclosures have already been proven in major real estate markets, including New York City. The state should launch a statewide energy benchmarking and disclosure program as soon as possible, requiring owners of large properties to annually report overall energy usage at the building, greenhouse gas emissions, and water usage. Within a few years, owners would need to disclose energy consumption data prior to sale or lease, starting in 2025 for large buildings, and periodic energy audits to further understand the energy efficiency and greenhouse gas mitigation opportunities specific to every large building. And by 2027, sellers of single-family homes would provide energy performance characterizations or ratings like the Home Energy Star rating system or Energy Star at points of sale. These ratings can work in parallel with other standards for health and well-being that also result in low carbon outcomes. All this information will inform future policies and improvements to energy programs, allowing us to reach our climate goals faster. Next slide. In order to manage the demands on the grid, our policies need to eliminate energy waste in existing buildings and drive vast improvements in energy conservation and energy efficiency in the very near term. The state should adopt energy efficiency standards for appliances that are not otherwise regulated by the federal government. These apply to many everyday devices like computer monitors and space heaters, and this means that when a consumer goes to purchase one of these devices, they will only be able to buy an efficient one. The net benefits of this type of appliance standard for consumers are in the tens of billions of dollars of energy savings. The state should require lighting upgrades for commercial spaces in large buildings and sub-metering for commercial tenants in parallel to what is already in place in New York City under Local Law 88. Upgrading decades-old lighting to current standards just plain makes sense. The cost paybacks are immediate and continue to return over time. And too many commercial tenants are unaware of their energy consumption habits. Sub-metering exposes energy waste and encourages energy responsibility. A whole building energy efficiency performance standard applied in 2030 for all existing large commercial properties would ensure managed demands on a clean electric grid. Operating costs would be reduced, wasteful practices eliminated, and fewer risks placed on the utility grid. The efficacy of a building performance standard is fully realized when imposed on multifamily buildings as well. However, the challenges faced by many multifamily property owners to pay for building improvements and the threats to housing affordability must be mitigated in order to equitably enact a performance standard on residential properties. Next slide. Regulations send clear market signals, and given enough time for technology development, job training, professional development, and supply chain growth, the industry and service providers can respond to educated consumer demands. In the quantitative analysis that demonstrates that nearly 85% emissions reduction in the building sector by 2050 is achievable, the majority of the emissions reductions is attributable to the electrification of heating and hot water systems as a modeled market response to regulatory prohibitions on replacing fossil fuel equipment. Next slide. In decarbonizing buildings, policymakers and regulators need to advance a managed, phased, and just transition from reliance on fossil fuel gas and the gas distribution system to a clean energy system, including elimination of embedded subsidies for fossil fuel gas, and we need to start this now. This transition demands careful technical analyses and difficult decisions, and likely will need to play out over several years. With long-term planning and careful phasing, we can potentially mitigate the risks and costs of stranded assets in the gas system. New York is at the very beginnings here, along with California and Massachusetts, in opening a gas planning proceeding under the Public Service Commission, which will drive toward a transparent gas system planning that aligns with our broader energy and climate goals. Despite the speed at which this transition needs to happen, this warrants careful, inclusive, and phased long-term planning with attention to safety, reliability, and affordability of service, understanding end user impacts, investigating options for reducing or repurposing the physical footprint of the gas system, and exploring alternative businesses and regulatory models for gas utilities in the long term. Concurrently, we need to develop a comprehensive equity strategy to incorporate the needs of low and moderate income households and disadvantaged communities in the transition to ensure they are not left behind. And we need to create an equitable transition plan for the gas industry workforce. Fundamentally, this work needs to minimize new investments in gas delivery infrastructure not otherwise needed for safety and reliability. This means changing utility incentives and planning and investment processes. Next slide. The public sector and utilities need to be phasing out incentives for fossil fuel gas equipment. We need to ensure that up-to-date, transparent information is available around grid readiness down to the building level so that building owners can plan to go fully electric. We've done this for solar in terms of mapping out hosting capacity, and utilities should do something similar for building electrification. We can make gas hookups less attractive by eliminating the 100-foot rule, which spreads the cost of new gas hookups across the rate base. There are several corresponding changes that will need to be considered in the public service law. We will also need to examine low carbon options for the New York City Con Ed district steam system. Next slide. HFCs are potent greenhouse gases, which are used in refrigeration, air conditioning, and heat pumps, and in spray foam insulation. These HFCs currently account for 20% of the total GHG emissions from buildings. Fortunately, our federal government, other states, and the industry also are working to drive toward technologies that use alternative refrigerants that have a much lower climate impacts. It will be challenging to get this done in the rapid time frame we need to meet, but by aligning New York State policy with other leading states and the federal EPA, we can send a strong signal to the industry while mitigating costs. We need to update the New York State codes to allow low global warming potential refrigerants. We have to require reclamation or destruction of refrigerants at end of life. Critically, we will need to make changes to the existing Department of Environmental Conservation refrigerant rule to drive towards new low and ultra low global warming potential technologies, aligning with federal policy. Next slide. Moving the market to decarbonizing buildings in a very short period will require new funding. Through the efforts to decarbonize buildings, we can improve housing quality and expand economic opportunities for low-income households and disadvantaged communities. At least $1 billion annually in funding is needed for incentive programs supporting building upgrades that serve low and moderate income households, affordable and public housing, and disadvantaged communities on an ongoing basis to avoid the risk of disinvestment. Likewise, we need to prioritize training and job placement. While there will be costs associated with this transformation of our building infrastructure, the potential for new economic opportunity is even larger. Moving forward, we will need to expand incentives to speed the uptake of building efficiency, electrification, and decarbonization retrofits for at least the next decade through federal and tax state credits and direct cash incentives. We will also need to create direct cash incentive programs for electrical service upgrades to offset the cost of preparing a building for electrification, similar to the electrical vehicle make-ready program. We must support and accelerate efficiency, electrification, and resilience in public housing across the state. In addition to NYCHA, there are over 30,000 units of public housing outside of New York City, which house many of the state's most vulnerable residents. We need to identify and fund retrofits and electrification of these buildings and resiliency centers that provide safe refuge, backup power, and community spaces to coordinate this during disaster relief. We need to supplement costs of non-energy building improvements as well, a need created by deferred maintenance that are a precondition to undertake any energy project. Next slide. In addition to public incentives, the sheer scale of transformation will also require unlocking private capital to provide low-cost financing to homeowners and building owners to pay for the necessary building upgrades for decarbonization. Right now, there is a lack of awareness and regulatory signals for the market to stimulate the development of inexpensive, large-scale financing, and time-bound mandates for decarbonization would send those clear market signals. Lending tools will need to be tailored for low-income households and buildings in disadvantaged communities to ensure equal participation and to protect from predatory lending. We need to help lenders to underwrite to energy performance standards and applicable regulatory requirements by mandating decarbonization for existing buildings and providing technical support to private lenders to expand an educated lending community. And as green requirements become more central to affordable housing transactions, we must adhere to best lending practices in our affordable housing agencies. We also need to streamline access to all utility and NYSERDA incentives and resources to make it both seamless and painless to build and retrofit energy efficient, all electric or electric ready and resilient developments. A working group of private sector lenders should be convened to expand literacy in energy efficiency and decarbonization and to bring to market financing for building retrofits at a scale and cost structure commensurate to achieving the Climate Act goals. For public buildings, we can immediately expand the use of performance contracting to achieve clean energy goals for state, municipal, and K-12 school building upgrades. The scale of the problem is the real challenge. We have almost 5 million single-family homes in the state and 250,000 multifamily buildings. So in order to retrofit all of those households, we must provide greater access to low-cost financing products for upgrades, especially for low-income homeowners. We can do this by expanding our partnerships with the private sector to capitalize revolving loan funds for building decarbonization and offer low-cost financing products that are equally accessible in every community. Next slide. Meeting the state's climate goals and retrofitting hundreds of thousands of buildings will require a significant scale-up in the clean energy workforce. Adele Ferranti will be speaking to the specifics of this in a few minutes. Next slide. A broad-based public outreach campaign is also needed to catalyze the market demand for these low-carbon solutions. It's essential to create a sense of shared responsibility. We have to spur this behavior with repeated and trusted messages, data, testimonials, and local engagement through multilingual public and consumer education and large-scale coordinated awareness, inspiration, and education campaigns. We need to build strategic partnerships that can have broad impact with utilities, trusted community leaders and organizations, unions, cooperative extensions, business councils, industry organizations, and elected officials to deliver technical assistance and resources for building decision makers and residents. I want to emphasize that we will ensure messengers, and media represent disadvantaged communities in marketing efforts and prioritize education and technical assistance for disadvantaged communities. We also need to make it much easier for these communities to access the information, incentives, and financing support that they need to take action. This includes a one-stop shop website and creating community hubs that provide education, technical assistance, and program navigator support. This builds on the work underway by NYSERDA and New York State utilities for programs that benefit low to moderate income New Yorkers. It's important to highlight those who do good, so let's publicize best practices and recognize leaders. Next slide. As we move forward, so will the technology and economic opportunities enabled by supporting research, development, and demonstration projects to encourage more companies and manufacturers to operate in New York State to bring innovative and scalable solutions to the marketplace. Reaching our carbon neutrality goal is dependent on innovation, bringing new technology into the forefront and adapting existing technologies to the New York and national markets. Next slide. New York State needs to take a leadership role to lower the embodied carbon of products and materials used in buildings. The best strategy to reduce embodied carbon is to encourage building reuse, beginning in urban centers. Procurement requirements and design specifications for state-funded projects, support education, research, development, and demonstrations, and business support will expand in-state manufacturing of alternative products that are lower in embodied carbon or made of carbon sequestering materials. We can expand the knowledge base of embodied carbon by requiring environmental product declarations for structural building materials and products, and promote the use of available modeling software for embodied carbon calculations. After we gain more experience and data, we will set targets that lower the allowable embodied carbon for private sector projects. Next slide. Change at this scale and making it happen to advance equity will require new resources. This is an economy-wide undertaking that requires coordination of private capital and public resources. Climate change is a global problem, and the changes we can make start at the local level as we continue to advocate for federal resources and policy support. We also need ongoing Public Service Commission attention to rate design and retail rate price signals for electrification and building to grid interactivity. Next slide. These policies will yield vast improvements in the way we build new construction, but will also have a profound impact on existing underperforming buildings. With building improvements and new equipment come increases to asset value and lower operating costs to the building owners. The business case for decarbonization in commercial properties continues to make sense, especially as more commercial tenants align corporate sustainability goals with their direct operations within buildings. Next slide. Within residential buildings, the benefits of decarbonization are obvious, with increased property value, improvements to health, and operating cost savings to residents and owners. However, the upfront costs are high, particularly in older buildings with long deferred maintenance. Any policy that may be pursued that would impose a building performance standard to compel energy efficiency improvements in housing must also come with incentives to mitigate the risks to affordability. Next slide. I'll now pass the microphone over to Michael Duramio, who will speak directly to these issues. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, John. We could move to the next slide, please. And the next slide, please. So as part of the Climate Act, the state of New York has set a requirement that 35% and a goal of 40% of the benefits from investments in clean energy go to environmental justice communities and low to moderate income and otherwise vulnerable households, what in the Act is referred to as disadvantaged communities. Next slide. Our most recent analysis finds that 48% of New York households would qualify as low or moderate income. And these households pay on average 3 times what non-low income households pay toward their energy bills as a percentage of their income. These households are frequently located in environmental justice communities as well, which are already disproportionately burdened with health impacts from poor environmental quality. They are often more susceptible to power outages and natural disasters as well, further threatening households that may be medically vulnerable and less mobile. So these households stand the most to gain from clean energy and electrification technologies that reduce energy burden, improve air quality, and build energy resilience. Next slide. While the strategies will need to evolve over time, we are looking to begin advancing decarbonization of low-income housing as part of an early stage market development, given there are unique building typologies and barriers that will take years to solve. The barriers this sector faces, I'm referring to low and moderate income housing, include not just the cost of energy upgrades, but also the cost to address deferred maintenance issues related to health, safety, and structural soundness of buildings. For electrification, this will also include electric service and distribution system upgrades as well. These issues can be even more complicated for renters, where there is a split incentive to make upgrades between the building owner and the tenant. Next slide. Our four-part approach to this sector is about driving engagement and development of LMI housing, or low to moderate income housing, with the needed subsidization while leveraging private investment to scale solutions. We're working to do this in a way that engages local communities as part of a long-term endeavor to achieve a just and equitable transition. First and foremost, we must be careful to reduce the possibility of increasing the energy burden from building decarbonization efforts on already vulnerable households. To this end, electrification must be done in combination with efficiency standards and upgrades. By adding in renewable energy, including rooftop solar and storage, as well as through grid interactivity and demand flexibility, we will lower the need for dirty peaker plant operations even further. Second, there are a variety of issues to address based on the nature of the building stock. LMI housing is not homogeneous. It includes subsidized housing of various kinds, as well as naturally occurring affordable housing, and everything from manufactured homes to large multifamily buildings. We will continue to expand the variety of building types targeted over time and based on available technologies and the regulatory context. We will continue to develop and phase in best fit solutions and strategies to various building types, heating fuels, and regulatory and building ownership structures. Third, wherever feasible, activities should aim to provide stakeholders with control of and a literal equity stake in clean energy and electrification assets as a pathway to long-term energy affordability and wealth building in these communities. Environmental justice is not only a means to achieving certain benefits and outcomes, but also about shifting away from exclusive decision-making processes and expanding the range of knowledge and voices that are valued in the decision-making process. The general theory here is that communities that are engaged in deciding how resources are allocated and how programs are designed to meet their needs will see better buy-in and better outcomes. And fourth, the fourth part of our strategy is we will focus on holistic approaches that integrate multiple solutions. As noted earlier, there's a tremendous opportunity to benefit LMI households living in substandard housing through upgrades that simultaneously address deferred maintenance, which is more common in LMI housing, along with electrification and integration of renewable energy and storage, energy storage. There is also tremendous value to communities from integrating resilience solutions, such as energy storage and even community cooling centers, to be able to weather disruptions and maintain comfortable and healthy living conditions. In addition, training in clean energy and electrification technologies and hiring of workers in the communities where these technologies are installed offers a mechanism to for not only receiving services being on the receiving end of services, but for engaging the community in a way that can multiply the economic impact from these projects. Next slide. So how are we going to scale the market for an equitable transition? To scale energy upgrades over the next 2 decades and more, we will need to align the New York State administered programs across agencies, as well as policies targeting low-income households and affordable housing to increase the impact of public funds. In addition to better utilizing available state and utility ratepayer funds, this approach also creates the opportunity for opening the door for utilization of federal funding to come in for shovel-ready initiatives, for example, from an infrastructure bill or expanded Department of Energy budgets. We will be looking to increase access to lending as well, where appropriate, for example, in subsidized housing, and providing protections from predatory practices for low-income homeowners. More generally, and where appropriate, we will be looking to de-risk private investment, support third-party aggregation of services, and inclusive financing models, including on-bill programs. As the transition off of fossil fuel accelerates, we will need to ensure that stranded costs associated with fossil infrastructure are not left to low-income ratepayers. This will become an increasing issue as the years go on. Next slide. So in terms of benefits, the goal of maximizing economic benefits to LMI households and disadvantaged communities starts with reducing energy costs, or what's referred to as energy burden, which is the percentage of income paid towards energy. But that is just the starting point. As we are focused on improving quality of housing in disadvantaged communities to provide greater comfort and value to those that have lived for too long in often underinvested or disinvested housing and communities. The work to decarbonize affordable housing over the next 20+ years will create tremendous economic opportunity for these communities. So we will prioritize training and jobs and workforce development in disadvantaged communities and for priority populations in those communities. The focus on early adoption of retrofits and new technology in these communities will help ensure that disadvantaged communities are part of the first wave and all subsequent waves of economic investment so that they too can reap the benefits from the full economic investment timeline in order to grow local businesses, build local wealth and the value of their homes, and help make the clean energy transition equitable. Next slide. So some of the non-energy benefits that we see here were covered by Patrick earlier in the presentation. And we'll take a closer look now at the impacts of these additional benefits from LMI housing decarbonization, which will of course require creating new mechanisms to quantify those benefits. To start, we expect improved indoor air quality from energy efficiency work and replacement of combustion appliances with clean heating and cooling technologies. As well, improved ambient air quality by reducing fossil fuel burning power plants, operations in environmental justice neighborhoods. Together, improved indoor and outdoor air quality can help substantially mitigate asthma and other respiratory illnesses, which are disproportionately common in these communities. In addition, electrification and heat pumps can add critical cooling capacity to housing units, which is all the more important for vulnerable households given the increase in heat waves that we expect to see and like we saw last summer. We also expect improved mental health from lower noise levels from equipment and envelope improvements, improved environmental lighting and access to daylight, and increased thermal comfort from improved envelope and related systems. By combining efficiency and electrification with renewable energy and storage, as well as grid interactivity, we can provide additional survivability and ability to maintain needed power during outages and natural disasters, whether in individual homes or in community facilities, such as warming and cooling shelters. In response to a legacy of disinvestment and racial and economic injustice in communities, the state is committed to increasing local capacity to participate in planning processes for community-scale clean energy transitions, to ensure that community priorities related to jobs, new business opportunities, community revitalization, and redevelopment, as well as public health, are addressed. And with that, I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Adele Ferranti, to talk about our workforce strategy.
Thank you, Michael. Next slide, please. I'm going to be speaking about workforce development and just transition and elaborating on some of the points we heard, some of the earlier presentations as it relates to workforce training, job growth, job creation, and opportunities to engage disadvantaged communities and priority populations. Next slide, please. As we think about decarbonizing our building stock, we know that we're going to deliver significant job growth and economic opportunity across the state. As we look at our New York Clean Energy Industry Report in 2019 data, we see that 77% of the clean energy sector employment is in energy efficiency, 127,000 jobs. About 88% of the businesses in the clean energy sector work in energy efficiency. And over half of that employment in the energy efficiency sector is related to installation of high efficiency HVAC equipment and heat pump. So as you see, there's a tremendous opportunity here to continue to expand these jobs as we look at training needs for existing workers and opportunities for new workers associated with the growth in that sector. Next slide, please. As we focus on our blueprint for transitioning to a stronger, cleaner workforce, we have a couple of considerations here related to investing in education and training, building trust within the market, and ongoing stakeholder engagement. The state must look for investments in education and training on advanced energy technologies and practices for new and existing workers that are sustainable. For example, as we develop new curriculum in a variety of these energy efficiency and building electrification areas, we really need to invest in curriculum that can be incorporated into pre-apprenticeship programs, apprenticeship programs, programs such as technical high school training, certificate programs, degree programs, and as part of continuing education opportunities. Training and continuing education to advance the skills of practitioners will ensure that systems and technologies are designed, installed, and operated properly, ensuring high performance, less callbacks, and customer satisfaction. Most importantly, training really needs to be designed to meet industry and employer needs, which can be addressed through multiple avenues for input, such as stakeholder and advisory groups, industry partnerships, where there are common skill gaps and training needs across an industry sector or across a technology area, for example. Introducing employers to training providers and community-based organizations, making those connections, being a matchmaker of sorts. Involving businesses in curriculum development. We have seen some excellent models where practitioners are actually adjunct professors at two-year colleges and as part of certificate programs. And we really see a great role for internships here to provide opportunities for new workers to get experience, to get feedback from those new workers on those clean energy jobs, and to support businesses over time. Next slide, please. As we think of the clean energy industries that are poised for significant growth, we really need to focus on building career interest and awareness, empowering communities through some of the vehicles Michael just mentioned and others have mentioned related to the clean energy hubs, and investment in innovation. Opportunities to increase local awareness in clean energy careers can be facilitated through partnerships with high schools, community-based organizations, programs such as Youth Build and Job Corps. We also see a great role, as I mentioned, for internships, capstone projects, inviting business leaders as guest speakers in high schools and in training programs. Also, site visits have also been an effective mechanism to introduce trainees, including priority populations and 16 to 24-year-olds, to clean energy jobs. So we see some great opportunities to build career interest and awareness. Coordinated efforts, as we heard earlier, through the clean energy hubs are important to identify and leverage private and public initiatives within a community to address those needs of the disadvantaged communities. Investments in innovation and anchoring an in-state supply chain of growing businesses and manufacturing will make it much easier for the state to achieve its climate goals while also attracting new investments and jobs. And finally, supporting robust supply chains from manufacturing through distribution through construction will require investments in training throughout the supply chain so we can address new skill needs, specific skills gaps in existing trades, and the development of career pathway training for new workers, particularly those with barriers to employment, as we heard earlier, and addressing those barriers to people that have been left out of the clean energy economy. Next slide, please. So on the right here, as you think about the growth in the energy efficiency sector, we saw a significant number of businesses in this sector. And in almost all areas related to heat pumps for those employers, they're seeing issues with the technical skills that new employees have or potential employees have, and there's just not enough relevant work experience. So we're looking at various approaches to address those skills gaps. We need to really figure out what those workforce gaps are and focus on skilled labor, accessibility to training, making sure we have trained workers in the regions of the state where we're seeing growth and supporting that growth. We've talked about developing more contractor partnerships, whether it's with training organizations or connecting design teams with trained labor, a lot of opportunities to make those connections. We already discussed raising consumer awareness and demand for these clean energy technologies. We also have to pay careful attention to labor and wage discrepancies, making sure that we are providing opportunities for individuals to enter this market with a fair wage. And again, we've talked about the opportunities to elevate disadvantaged communities, to work with minority and women-owned businesses, to support, of course, New York State companies, service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, work cooperatives, and of course, we really need to pay attention to transitional industries as we move towards a clean energy economy. Next slide, please. So again, thinking about a just transition and equity, while the fossil fuel industry workers are of a particular area of focus for us, we want to ensure that all workers have the opportunity for training and employment in the clean energy economy. For transitioning workers, we need to assess current and transferable skills, look for opportunities to advance those skills or retrain those workers. Sometimes we need to provide training while they're still working so they're prepared to move into a new job without any gaps. We also need to assess current wage, hiring, and labor practices and help transitions to new clean energy jobs. As we think about residents of disadvantaged communities and opportunities to prioritize and elevate those residents, we're looking at support for, again, disadvantaged communities, environmental justice zones, opportunity zones, support and growth in the area of minority and women-owned businesses and contractors, service-disabled veteran-owned businesses, to ensure we have diversity, equity, inclusion considerations that are addressed as we expand the workforce. And for people with additional barriers to employment, we really need to provide wraparound services, such as help with job searching, developing resumes, interviewing skills. Sometimes we need to provide funding for transportation. That seems to be a very big barrier, transportation costs, childcare, and even proper work tools. I think in some programs we've even bought steel-toed boots so people can enter into the clean energy economy. Next slide, please. I know you've heard this a few times today, but we really need to look at scaling our workforce development efforts through collaborations. We can't do this alone. As we think about the clean energy hubs, for example, they're going to be partnering with organizations within a region, connecting clean energy, social services, housing, health, economic development, and academic organizations to provide, as Michael said, a holistic, multidisciplinary approach to meeting energy and climate justice needs of disadvantaged communities. We need to provide help to residents to connect them to clean energy and related program and resources. We need to help advance diversity by connecting residents and small businesses with the resources and training opportunities that can lead to jobs. Achieving the energy, environmental, and climate justice objectives of the Climate Act will require that all communities are actively engaged in the clean energy transition, including communities that have traditionally faced barriers to participating in or benefiting from New York's emerging clean energy economy. And some of the key groups I just want to highlight, I know you've heard about partnerships and groups we need to work with in a few other presentations, but there are groups like New York State Department of Homes and Community Renewal, Housing Preservation and Development, New York City Housing Authority, the different associations of counties, towns, villages. New York State Department of Labor will be a critical partner in these efforts. Of course, we're going to be working with the unions and continuing our relationships with the unions. Organizations like SUNY, State University of New York, and CUNY, the City University of New York. And finally, working closely with our regional economic development councils to make sure our efforts are coordinated within a region, and again, leveraging other resources and opportunities. So as you've heard a lot today, workforce development and training will be key to growing these clean energy industries, and we're looking forward to continuing our community engagement, our outreach strategies to learn more about what those specific needs are and opportunities to address those needs. And with that, I'll pass it back to Greg. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Adele and Michael and John and Patrick and Karen, John Williams and Matt. We've heard a lot today and yesterday as well. I think it's really important to just understand how all of these different pieces need to work together. Decarbonization is such a complex undertaking that we need to attack it from all sorts of different directions, and hopefully you've gotten a sense of that over the last couple of days. So let me talk about workforce development. Workforce development. I'm reading the slide. That's not my slide. Next, stakeholder engagement. Throughout the development of the roadmap, we've had and will continue to have a number of layers of stakeholder engagement. Next slide. We started out by convening our technical advisory group. It's been a true pleasure to work with these folks. I'm not going to list all of their names, and there are a couple others who have been on this tag who are not represented here because they've actually shifted over and become consultants to NYSERDA, and we need to keep conflicts clear. But this group, you can see, has a wide variety of organizations that were represented from the public sector, private sector, National Lab, New York City. And importantly, we had representatives from all of these groups who gave us real expertise in all four of this iteration of the roadmap's priority building sectors. So we've officially had 3 tag meetings, convened a couple of smaller tag group meetings to review policy options, and innumerable informal discussions in 1s or 2s or 3s on decarbonization topics. And our tag has helped shape the content and narrative arc of the roadmap, and helped us develop our outline, and importantly helped us recruit other experts for our stakeholder roundtables and webinars. Next slide. Speaking of which, we held 15 information gathering sessions, either in person or virtually, with access from around the state. Tried to make sure that people could participate from all different New York or NYSERDA offices, Albany, Buffalo, and the city. Before we were it turned into a virtual process, which I will say went seamlessly with our crack tech team here. And I'm not one of those folks. They're the people who are bringing you this this webinar today. The sessions covered a variety of topics, as you can see, from affordable housing, environmental justice, embodied carbon, refrigerants, workforce, value proposition, technology, best practices in construction, all sorts of different topics. And they were ably facilitated by Scott Johnstone and Russell Unger, so that we were able to sit in listening mode, and it's really helped us. We've learned a ton, and we're presenting a lot of that today. Next slide. So the stakeholder process has been, as I said, a number of layers, included a number of layers. And right now we are participating in the second one. I've been really encouraged watching the Q&A, not reading all of the questions as they come in, but there have been a ton of questions, which we will do our best to get to most of. But it's showing the engagement of the folks on the call today. And this is the next layer, right? We really want people listening to submit comments and tell others that they have the opportunity to submit comments, and the details of the comment process will be given a little bit later. After our publication, there will be another round of engagement at an even broader level, where we try to take the messaging within this roadmap and take it out to the entire state, right? So we'll be looking to partner with community-based organizations, the clean energy or the clean energy communities and the climate hubs. And we will be coordinating with the Climate Action Council's public outreach next year. We'll be working on a number of levels with various channel partners, and looking to increase the number of folks that are involved in this process beyond the 1,000 or so local and national experts that took part in our 15 listening sessions. As noted, we've also closely followed the deliberations and recommendations of the Energy Efficiency and Housing Panel to the Climate Action Council, and will continue to pay attention as the scoping plan is being developed. And again, kudos and thanks to our crack consulting team, countless hours from ARUP, E3, New Buildings Institute, and the Rocky Mountain Institute. So after the publication, one other thing we will likely try to do is turn this roadmap into a series of targeted briefing materials for various market segments, because every good roadmap needs its cliff notes. But seriously, we want to make this digestible and actionable by all of the different groups of individuals and organizations with whom we need to partner to make this a reality. So next slide. Here again is the link to where we want you to go to learn more and to make comments. So again, let's get you all out there, talk to your friends, colleagues, neighbors. We need more and more building decarbonization ambassadors. Next slide. Which brings us to the wrap up. To recap some of what we've heard over the last 2 days and think about our next steps. As noted, it's really a process of integrating all sorts of different elements to reach our goals. Next slide. So There are no two ways about it. We heard John Lee. We will need strong regulatory policies for the built environment to reach New York State's climate goals. But to minimize the cost and ensure an equitable transition, it's really important that these regulations have fully transparent implementation dates and that those are set far enough in advance to allow the market to ramp up to the necessary scale in equipment, workforce, demand generation, etc. And we will need market enabling policies and programs to ease the transition. Next slide. We have emphasized the co-benefits of health, safety, and comfort in our discussion of the decarbonization value proposition. But what we really need to do is educate and emphasize these benefits to the public, because we need to build market demand for buildings and spaces that provide these attributes. A bottom line in real estate, when tenants demand something, owners will work to provide it. And this holds true across both the commercial and residential sectors. But as Patrick and Kara noted, we also need to quantify the health benefits. So here's an example. I think this is a really interesting project that we've been working on for quite some time at this point. NYSERDA is partnering with the New York State Department of Health in a healthy homes pilot. What this means, so respiratory ailments frequently are triggered or worsened by mold, by pests, by particulate matter from indoor fossil fuel combustion and other housing conditions. It's very often significantly less expensive to resolve these underlying conditions in the home once and for all than to repeatedly treat the symptoms in emergency rooms. And of course, taking that approach would dramatically improve the lives of those suffering from these ailments. So the goal of this project is to demonstrate these cost savings with the ultimate goal of what we're calling braided funding between the state's Medicare redesign initiative with traditional energy efficiency and electrification funding sources to subsidize complete home interventions that hit on health, safety, and decarbonization measures. So I think that's a really exciting idea and a potential way to find some of the dollars that we're going to need to make this transition. And that's just one example of how this transition can provide exciting opportunity to make up for lost time in prioritizing underserved communities like Michael was just talking about. But we also need to bear in mind that the clean energy transition is a major economic development opportunity. And by leading the way with these critical infrastructure investments, we will position New York State as the place to be for businesses looking to succeed in the 21st century clean energy economy. Next slide. Cost, right? This slide notes some of the areas that we've talked about where certain elements of our decarbonization work are already cost effective today, as highlighted by Patrick and Kara. We certainly acknowledge that there will be an incremental upfront cost to this transition, and we're keenly focused on reducing that cost. But let's remember, these costs are actually investments in one of New York's most valuable assets, its building stock. And to reiterate, the cost of these infrastructure investments really pales in comparison to the potential cost of inaction. And as we've noted, there are a number of ways through thoughtful policy and program implementation that we can work to reduce those costs. Policy clarity, driving scale, the training and developing a skilled workforce like Adele was just talking about, incorporating the entire architectural and engineering and construction ecosystem, education and consumer awareness to build market demand, innovation in manufacturing and technology, the development of large-scale, low-cost financing mechanisms to entice private capital, and teaching and facilitating the integrated design process so we wind up with experienced design and project delivery teams, shortened supply chains, and other conditions that can drive down project implementation costs. Next slide. So here are another few areas that do make sense economically today. And this provides us with some insight into places where we should be able to make progress quickly. For example, there is no reason to be constructing new buildings today that will need to be retrofitted tomorrow. As we'll see in a few minutes, there are leading developers and building owners throughout the state that are already reaching that conclusion and developing carbon-free construction projects. It's truly exciting. But we need to quickly make this carbon neutral building approach into business as usual by signaling that new construction codes will soon require this process. Next slide. We talked about technology, the ideas of where we should focus. And the key is to focus our RD&D investment on technology that have the best prospects for cost reduction and impact. In other words, scaling potential. I'd like to emphasize the need for NYSERDA and New York State to remain abreast of global decarbonization technology advances that are promising for adaptation to New York, like some building retrofit and decarbonization strategies that we're seeing in the Nordic countries, the Netherlands, other European countries. NYSERDA's Empire Buildings Challenge, a current program, is focused on demonstrating some of these technologies for high-rise buildings, and we'll see what projects get launched under that the first round of that challenge later this year. We also have Retrofit New York working to adapt and scale the Dutch energy sprong model for retrofitting existing buildings to net zero performance. And like we've mentioned, refrigerants like methane are very intensive greenhouse gases over a 20-year time frame and then dissipate. A technical point here is that the Climate Act requires that carbon accounting utilize a 20-year time horizon. So methane and refrigerants will start taking on a substantially larger role and urgency in the discussion. Next slide. In case anyone didn't hear what John Lee was saying, strong policies are really crucial, right? This transition requires a suite of policies, both regulatory and market enabling. And again, we need to bear in mind the importance of societal benefits. You know, these benefits, these do drive down the costs to the healthcare system, the grid, the insurance industry, and others, and will be enjoyed by all of us. Next slide. So we just heard Michael talking about disadvantaged communities. I'm not going to go over the bullets on this slide again, but I want to mention here, stop and talk about an example of what we mean when we talk about inclusive decision making within underserved communities. So over the past year or year and a half, NYSERDA piloted with a collaboration of New York City-based community and environmental justice organizations, including UPROSE and the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance. These organizations represent historically disadvantaged communities, but importantly, in close proximity to some of the city's most polluting peaker plants. So this pilot study focused on a neighborhood in Brooklyn called Sunset Park, which does include peaker plants, and looked at solutions that can address energy end uses in buildings. Excuse me. The goal of the work is to deliver a set of technical resources for community-based organizations in the study area that can inform their program design and community participation in energy planning. And specifically, this pilot study utilized utility, NYSO, the New York Independent System Operator, the grid operator, and other available data to develop individual and aggregated building load profiles to understand how these loads are driving electricity peak demands and trigger the use of the peaker plants. Then analyze the potential of various clean distributed energy resources solar PV, storage, energy efficiency, demand response, among others, that could be sited within the community and all driving toward a set of tools that is phase 2 of the research currently underway that will allow the community to develop and assess various strategies for building sited distributed energy resources and to reduce the use of peaker plants. That's what we mean when we talk about inclusiveness, right? The community is involved in studying the problem, figuring out what the potential solutions can be, and then hopefully this will inform strategy for potential future NYSERDA procurements for the implementation of these distributed energy resources that meet the plan goals. And a nice little offshoot of this, the partner organizations also formed a larger coalition called PEAK, which released a widely circulated report on peaker plants in New York City, and is responsible for an MOU with the New York Power Authority, committing the authority to explore battery alternatives to its peaker facilities. So this kind of thing works. Next slide. I've also emphasized a number of times, or we have, the importance of demand flexibility to reduce impact on the grid, right? Buildings are part of a system. The system is buildings, the grid, electric and gas, and transportation. They all need to work together. So it requires systems thinking. You know, how do we optimize the impact of electrification on the grid, which is all about reducing peak demand and local grid constraints through load flexibility, storage, and controls. You know, very important focus area for research and development. But if we think back to the solution set modeling, you heard Kara remind us that various envelope improvement measures for existing buildings do not necessarily appear to be cost effective to building owners at current cost points. But those slides also noted that the modeling does not consider the benefits of those envelope improvements to the grid and the reduction in expense of expanding the grid that they could lead to. So given the fact that better envelopes will reduce the cost of the grid expansion, shouldn't we be working with the Public Service Commission and Department of Public Service to develop some process to utilize a portion of those grid benefits to help pay the cost of these envelope measures? That's what we mean when we say we've got to monetize the co-benefits. And then, you know, last but not least, what's the optimal and most equitable way of transitioning from the natural gas system? Can we repurpose gas infrastructure? Can we invent new business models for gas utilities? You know, remember that methane is also a highly intensive, over a 20-year time frame. So the Climate Act accounting will increase the importance of reducing methane emissions. And DPS has, as noted, recently opened a proceeding on the natural gas transition. Next slide. So where do we go from here? As we've said, this is a long-term plan. This is a long-term document. This is the first iteration. We will have future iterations coming relatively soon in the next few years, focusing even more on embodied carbon and the refrigerant issue. Likely candidates for typologies for the next iteration to focus on: K through 12 schools, big box retail, warehouses, hotels, hospitals. And then we also need additional focus on skyscrapers, restaurants, commercial kitchens, grocery stores, and a number of other building typologies. Next slide. So this is one of my favorite pieces here, some case studies. This isn't science fiction. This is happening today. It's happening all around the state. We only have time to mention a few of these buildings, but they're retrofits, they're new construction, they're gut rehab. It's already happening, and it's already happening. And I'm hearing about new projects every day. Some of whom really didn't even know that NYSERDA was around, or that these incentives were available, and they're just making the decision to go this route because the economics demand it. So here are a few of these. Let me just stop and check. Am I hearing that my sound is off, or am I good?
You're good. You're good, Greg.
Okay, thanks. Well, back to the case studies. So let's just look through a few of these. Each one of these could be a 20-minute presentation, but I'm going to want to go quickly. And I would also note, again, that these are only a handful of examples. We've had 42 Building of Excellence Award winners, only a few of those projects involved in this list today. So here's a single family house. It's a gut rehab and got to very good energy results using energy recovery ventilation. This one had a ground source heat pump installation, spray foam installation, Energy Star appliances, solar thermal hot water, and PV. So go to the next slide. You see some of the results of this. They got to a point where, and this is an upstate farmhouse, that the average monthly utility bills are $18, which is really only paying for a connection charge to the grid. And the owner's return on investment, and this is indeed after incentives, but their return on investment on the solar and hot water system, 16.1%, and the geothermal system, 10.9%. So these are cost effective in certain cases today. Next slide. Here's an interesting new construction project, 72 units in 6 buildings, all electric and going for net zero in upstate New York and in Geneva. This is using a prefabricated modular construction style. Great project. Next slide. This is a gut rehab in Rome, New York of affordable housing. So they're keeping the existing building, which means, as we mentioned, significantly reducing the amount of embodied carbon from the project. And they're using a panelized wall assembly to essentially reclad the exterior of the building, all electric, trying to get to net zero. And again, this is affordable housing done by Beacon Communities. Next project. So this is an interesting pilot. I think I mentioned this yesterday in our comments or our Q&A period, where we're working with a New York City Housing Authority on a net zero energy retrofit pilot. This is a Retrofit New York team providing technical assistance here, but the funding is coming entirely from NYSERDA. They want to figure this out. How do they take their existing buildings, next slide, and turn them into decarbonized, comfortable, attractive places to live? So we're really looking forward to the rollout of this project. Hopefully construction can begin early in 2022. And the exciting thing is that NYSERDA is looking at this to try to use it as a demonstration, that a proof of concept. So if it works and it's we can show the path to cost effectiveness. They've got, let's see, this one is, I don't know, somewhere in the hundreds of units. They've got 182,000 units that they're interested in rolling these approaches out to. Next slide. This is a new construction project in Albany. Again, primarily affordable housing. They're going for triple net zero, meaning energy, waste, and water. And it's it will be a very exciting project. Next slide. A little bit more on this one. It will be net zero, all electric. It's fully modular construction. So this is kind of next generation thinking happening today. Next slide. Here we have another new construction. This one, multifamily low rise, upstate in New Paltz. They expect tenants will pay $0 in monthly electricity costs, with projected energy savings 20 to 25% over code compliant buildings. Estimated payback of 8 to 10 years. Next slide. That one also used a geothermal system. This is an interesting one because it's a super tall down in Long Island City, right across the river from Manhattan. 42 stories, mixed use. It's market rate. A lot of condominium dwelling units, but also 9 floors of core and shell office space, future library, future retail space. So all sorts of different types of buildings are undertaking these projects. This is another Building of Excellence winner. So yeah, fully electric, LEED Gold, induction cooktops, all the good stuff. Next slide. One or two more here and we'll wrap it up. This is one of the projects out of the first round of Retrofit New York. Casa Pasiva, it's an affordable housing project in Brooklyn run by Riseborough. And it's using an exterior insulation layer, so it's done with residents in place. Went to all electric space heating and cooling. Interestingly, running conduits down through the in channels within that EFIS exterior insulation to bring heating and cooling to individual units. Next slide. And I think this is the. Let me go one more. Yeah, so this is a small office retrofit. It's upstate, going for net zero with solar arrays. Simple payback period of roughly 2 years for all of these measures. Again, just showing how cost effective it can be today. Next slide. And this is a retrofit of a commercial office building downstate, I believe. Yeah, Deer Park, no, upstate, Deer Park, New York. 31,000 square foot office building that is now offsetting 100% of its power usage with renewable solar. So, like I say, I could go on and on with these case studies. We could run through another 50 of them, but I don't have time for that. But it's showing you that it is achievable today and needs to become the business as usual process of tomorrow. So with that, I will wrap and turn it over to Matt.
Thanks, Greg. Next slide, please. I guess we had a couple more case studies. If we can just jump ahead. We got a good list of them here, as Greg said. So thanks to all of the speakers and to all the participants for hanging in there. There was a lot of dense material today. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions by decarbonizing the built environment is a shared responsibility. It's important that we hear from you to make sure that we get it right, to make our current efforts inform the development of what will ultimately be the final version of the Carbon Neutral Buildings Roadmap. We do ask that you take time after these presentations to submit your comments and feedback through the Carbon Neutral Buildings Roadmap website. You can submit comments at any time after the conclusion of this presentation through August 6th. The presentation deck is currently available and on the webpage for you to reference to help you submit your comments, and the recordings from yesterday and today will be made available later this week so that you can view the presentation again. Next slide, please. So thank you for those who have already submitted questions. There are quite a few of them. I don't know that we'll be able to get through all of them, but we're going to use the rest of our time here together to try to answer at least as many questions as we can. And again, I encourage folks to continue submitting questions and comments through the Q&A function for the next 30 minutes. And then, of course, please do consider submitting your formal questions and comments through the webpage interactivity. So switching over, Adele, I might ask you to join me for this first one, if you don't mind. It begins with a comment for you, Adele, and then a question. It says, it's important to engage the trade schools, particularly in red-line communities, and to train the disenfranchised, BIPOC, and other poor in emerging technologies. How will you do that to ensure that this is prioritized?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Good question. So we have been working with the trades for some time. Some examples are for the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, 32BJ. We're looking to provide training for them to advance the skills of existing workers to attract new workers into their apprentices, for example. We provide them with higher incentives and additional funding if they target priority populations and work in disadvantaged communities. So we're looking for more opportunities to work with the trades. And we've even supported some opportunities to really expand pre-apprenticeship programs to make sure we have more people going into the pipeline, more people going into the trades, and we're again focusing on people from disadvantaged communities and priority populations. Does that answer the question, Matt?
I think it does. Thanks, Adele.
Thank you.
This next question, Patrick, I might ask you to join me for actually the next two questions, Patrick, if you don't mind. The first one starts with, this looks like an asset value question. The first one starts with, how will you handle old and low value buildings? How can you get homeowners and building owners to invest in a property where its value will not enable them to get a return on investment, and where most or some won't even have the capital to make that investment? Patrick, are you able to help answer that?
Yes. So, first of all, we're going to work hard to drive down the cost of retrofits and create additional mechanisms for funding the work. But you need to remember the carbon neutral buildings technology and policy is not going to solve all of the problems with the older building stock that we have in New York and distressed communities. The best lens for viewing this issue, I think, is that when we invest in renovating older buildings and when we invest in revitalizing communities, that work should be done to the carbon neutral standards, but it is going to take resources beyond those available in the carbon neutral policies to achieve those results.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. If you don't mind hanging in with me for the next one here, I think this next one might go to you as well. It reads, has there been any research done to study the behaviors of consumers or end users? All of these good ideas may not work if people don't embrace them, or if people don't embrace them.
So I'll talk about some work that we're currently doing ahead of a single family carbon neutral building design effort. And this involves doing stakeholder input from a number of sources. So lack of consumer familiarity with heat pumps and consumer preferences for gas stoves and fireplaces will need to be overcome. And we'll need to overcome that with education, but also with electric products with equivalent or better attributes. The new electric products have the potential to be very intelligent and actually provide more functionality. The systems themselves are not harder to operate, so it is mostly working through a brief learning curve. But it is people's lack of familiarity with heat pump technology that concerns them. They have almost no thought about putting a heat pump in for air conditioning, for cooling. It is really heat pump for heating that is a challenge. But the equipment is actually simpler to operate and safer.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. Actually, if you don't mind hanging on, this next one also might queue up for you. It reads, and it's a multi-part question. So it reads, hope these few questions can be answered today. The carbon neutral economy goal in the CLCPA counts for both operational and embodied carbon. How embodied carbon for the year of 2050 is expected to be calculated? Say construction materials produced in 2049 and installed in 2050. Yeah, so essentially it's asking about embodied carbon and how that will be included.
The CLCPA in its current form does not set targets for embodied carbon. So those carbon targets set in the CLCPA are carbon emissions. We value the immediate impact that reducing embodied carbon has, but the framework in terms of what we can accomplish in New York State is in its early development. Reuse of existing buildings and components designing out high embodied carbon materials are part of that framework. I just want to give an example. That legislation was passed in this last session that just ended on requiring low embodied concrete for certain state construction projects. So work is going on. Tools are actually just really coming out in the marketplace so the designers can to reduce embodied carbon. And in the Buildings of Excellence competition we mentioned earlier, we did achieve significant embodied carbon in some of the projects, and we gave award points for that. So work is going on, but targets have not yet been developed for embodied carbon.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. Appreciate that. Kara, I might ask you to come back in for the next one or maybe even two questions. The first one reads, have you run an analysis of how community solar impacts the all-electric efficient building and has lower cost electricity? That is consistently how it works across California.
Great, yeah, good question. We didn't end up running this analysis specifically or this scenario, but completely agree that it's a powerful strategy as we're seeing elsewhere throughout the country. I would add that it can even, like adding solar PV on homes or buildings can be even more impactful to reduce carbon emissions when it's coupled with energy storage and or demand flexibility, because then we can shift loads into that time where we have renewable energy being generated on site. And so we can avoid some of the duck curve syndrome that you're experiencing in California. But that can help manage both costs and carbon at the building and system level.
Okay, thanks, Kara. And if you don't mind hanging with me for one more question, as long as I got you here. It reads, your higher upfront costs for new construction, assuming you install induction cooktops. Induction stoves are expensive, but not necessarily when moving to all-electric solutions. Put differently, I would have expected new construction to have lower upfront costs. Could you take a moment and see if you can respond to that?
Yeah, of course. So our analysis did assume induction cooktops, and costs can be lower for all electric depending on the gas connection costs, which in new construction are not, they can be considerable. I would also add that RMI has published a separate analysis that can be found on our website showing new construction in New York City. The all-electric home actually saves $6,800 in net present costs and 46 tons of CO2 emissions, and that's over a 15-year analysis period. So great point.
Great, thanks, Kara, appreciate that. This next question, Michael, if you don't mind coming back online for a moment, I think this next question might go to you. It reads, how can we ensure that the investment in energy efficiency and electrification of all buildings results in good paying jobs and strengthened businesses for poor people and other priority populations such as Black, Brown, and Indigenous? Michael, are you able to come back and help answer that?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
You're clear, okay, good. Yeah, I really appreciate this question. There is clearly major investment that's going to be happening to decarbonize buildings across the state, including buildings in communities of all types, including low-income communities, Black, Brown, Indigenous, and other communities of color. And so presents a tremendous opportunity, which I think is what's behind the question. But how do we make sure that those opportunities, result in jobs and businesses? So, I think a starting point for us is, building upon the existing network that we already have of contractors and community-based organizations providing services in these communities, many of which hire directly from the communities already. So we really want to expand upon that when we talk about electrification and other technologies coming online. And that's part of this, what I mentioned earlier in my talking points about engaging with disadvantaged communities up front at the first wave. In addition, we recently announced, and was mentioned briefly by some others, the development of regional clean energy hubs. So there'll be regional hubs for all the 10 economic development regions in the state that will specifically focus on local community capacity building to ensure that these opportunities are realized, specifically focusing on disadvantaged communities. So, these hubs will be, much like Adele mentioned, focused on building these relationships and partnerships across the community that will be critical for those jobs to be realized, for businesses to have the skills and the people and the knowledge that they need in order to take advantage of those opportunities that are created. So we are very much focused on making inroads very much upfront within communities, working with stakeholder community-based organizations in those communities that know those communities, that understand their and that can understand their priorities, understand who to connect with and how to connect with them, so that they're aware early on about this coming wave, this first wave that we're in right now, and all subsequent waves, so that they can benefit from these investments.
Great. Thanks, Michael. I think our next question, Greg, if you don't mind coming back online, I think this next one might go to you. It reads for slide 22, which I think was one of the Buildings of Excellence slides, but for slide 22, how was the cost baseline, 0 on the y-axis, established? Are you able to come back and help answer that, Greg?
I'm here, and I can answer that. So that was the data slide with all those dots that told the compelling story. And the answer is that in the Buildings of Excellence initiative, project submittals required the design teams to not only give us their cost data for their high performance project, but also provide estimated cost for a theoretical business as usual sort of code compliant level building of the same size and configuration. So the 0% baseline was in fact provided by each of the design teams themselves.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Patrick, I think I'm going to shoot this next question over to you if you're available. It reads, design strategy common implies lack of opportunity for new firms and minority firms. What actual data do you have that confirms that experienced teams will make a difference?
So the experienced teams that we're referring to that went from 10 to 15% premiums to design and build decarbonized buildings to 0 to 2% premiums, they were typically achieving that within 3 projects. So this is not a long experience curve. The thing that I would say is this is actually a disruptive time in the market, and I believe it's going to create opportunity for design teams that master these skills. There actually are very few developers who are skilled at doing this. NYSERDA has a variety of incentives available for those of you that are doing these projects through our new construction offering. And we include design assistance and make money available to walk through that learning curve. So I actually see this as a time of disruption to business as usual and an opportunity for the firms that really grasp this first.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. Kara, this next one is specifically tagged for you by the person asking the question. It says, can you include a link or additional information on the incentives that you were describing? Are you able to come back to help respond to that, Kara?
Yeah, sure thing. It's a good question. I anticipate there are other questions out there about the incentives, and well, it's too nuanced maybe to speak to individual costs since they vary significantly by building use and other factors. I'd be happy to point to a couple of our kind of good go-to resources. I think the first I'd be remiss not to answer, not to mention, is the NYSERDA website. There's a lot of great resources on incentive programs there. I think some of the strongest we've seen across the country. The second is the DESIRE database. So it's DSIRE. It's the database for state incentives and renewable energy and efficiency. And that covers both local and state and federal incentives that are available. And they keep that, it's federally managed, and they do a pretty good job keeping that current. I would also encourage a couple more. The local utility website. There are often utility programs directly through your utility that can provide good incentives. And then one specific note for heat pumps, the New York State Clean Heat Program has some really powerful and impactful incentives there. Good questions.
Thanks, Kara. And this next question I might flag for Rob Best. Rob, just to give Rob a brief introduction, has not been one of our speakers, but Rob is a senior director at Arab who has worked yeoman's hours doing model run after model run after model run for us, and spending late evenings and weekends helping refine all of the inputs and characteristics. So I might ask Rob to help come online if he's able to and join us for the next answer. I know he's in remote circumstances today, but we appreciate him taking the time to join us. The question, Rob, for you, if you're able to respond, is what cost of electricity and natural gas are you using for the modeling? Upstate costs and downstate costs for electricity are very different, with stress on the vary. Rob, are you able to help join and answer to that question? Looks like I'm getting a note that Rob is not able to join us, but I'll respond for Rob, which is based on rates. We based our analysis on local electricity and gas pricing from around the state. So we did aggregate common rates into building groups and classes, so they were specific for each building type. So for example, multifamily downstate electricity rates range between 18 and 19 cents per kWh, and upstate electricity rates ranged from 7 to 12 cents. So hopefully my answer gives some response to that. Kara, if I might ask you to come back for next question here. This one looks like a good one for you. It says, what are the approximate energy savings of a code-compliant building versus a comfort-compliant building? For example, a code-compliant building uses X% energy of a comfort-compliant building. Are you able to help answer that?
Yeah, we do have the energy data that's kind of backing up our cost data. So I don't have the energy data offhand, but in terms of costs, the code compliant shell reduces operating costs $500 more than a comfort shell. So in a couple of the slides, the code compliant shell reduced energy costs by $2,400 and a comfort shell reduced OpEx by $1,900. And those are both for an oil baseline, but I would expect a similar ratio between those two for a gas building.
Great. Thanks, Kara. And as long as I got you on video, if you don't mind hanging with me for another minute, I think I got another one that might be a good one for you. This one says, according to EPA's COBRA model, the burning of gas in New York homes produces health impacts of between $1.5 and $3.3 billion per year. Did you consider those impacts when comparing the cost of alternatives? Note, most of the cost is due to premature mortality as a result of PM 2.5 exposure.
Yeah, great question. And it sounds like coming from a knowledgeable source. So we did not consider capital, non-utility, non-O&M costs or benefits in the financialing model at this time. We mentioned co-benefits kind of repeatedly throughout, but we didn't quantify it in this iteration of the roadmap. But this is a really important data set, and I would say it also points towards another recent analysis that we've seen coming out of Harvard that was released last month, showing slightly higher healthcare costs and impacts. So it showed commercial and residential buildings are now responsible for approximately 18,300 early deaths and 205 billion in health impacts. And that's across the US. So it's definitely a area that, of significant concern that we're starting to get a little bit more of a handle on the direct impacts of. So good question.
Great, thanks, Tara.
Jump in there. I mean, that's exactly the focus of this Healthy Homes Initiative, right? Is quantifying these, proving them out, and then bringing healthcare dollars into the mix to help us pay for the decarbonization and health and safety work.
Great. Thanks, Greg, and thanks, Kara. John Lee, if you don't mind coming back online for a moment, I think this might be a good one for you to answer for us. It reads, the difficult scenario is converting gas, air and water heating to heat pump, air and water heating. Are you considering additional incentives and policy changes to help make this conversion economical, which is the only reason for some people to make the change? John, are you able to help answer that question?
Sure. The policy conclusion is centered around mandates, mainly because it is not economically viable, which is why no one does it today. In certain sectors, we are coming close to a cost parity, particularly in new construction, but our scenario analysis found that in every case on a retrofit, there is a cost premium with doing this in today's market. The policy directive here to shift to mandates would compel property owners to take on the work irrespective of its economic outcomes. But this would also put signals in the market that would increase the supply of professionals and equipment that can meet this mandated need. And in the interim, it is incumbent upon government to be able to incentivize and offset costs in the near term in a trajectory towards future cost compression, cost reduction, particularly for those in disadvantaged communities, low-income households that we may want to have brought into the new clean energy economy sooner rather than leaving them behind in the transformation economy and left with stranded assets.
Thanks, John. Appreciate that. I'm going to try to merge together 3 or 4 different questions, and Greg, I'm going to ask you to try to give the next response here. But there's a few questions that ask essentially about timing of some of our work and how we relate to some other states and cities, and just wondering if you can just spend a quick minute and just kind of share how New York compares nationally in terms of some of our policy and program advancement and carbon neutrality.
Okay, that's a little vague, but yeah, I think the answer is kind of twofold. One is, if we're talking about the dates that we're putting out there for suggesting the implementation timeframes for our regulatory mandates, we do think, as I mentioned, that it's really important to put those far enough in advance to allow the private sector and the rest of the market to ramp up to the scale that's going to be necessary and get the grid prepared to handle all of the electrification of the heating. So, I think that we are, as a state, right up there with just about everyone else. California is doing some things quicker than we are. We're doing some things quicker than California, kind of neck and neck. And fortunately, trying to coordinate and collaborate with each other to figure out what the best practices are. Some cities may be a little bit ahead of us. Somebody mentioned Seattle. They're definitely cutting edge, but let's remember New York City has Local Law 97, which has actually imposed emissions limits on large buildings, and I think that's a nation-leading endeavor. We are definitely focused on trying to share our work as broadly as we can to all sorts of different states and municipalities. because we know that we don't solve climate change by fixing it in New York. It's a national problem, it's a global problem, so we're doing everything we can to serve as a model for other jurisdictions.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate that. And sorry to give you a vague response or question. I was trying to merge together a few things together for you. But if we can advance to the next slide, we'll go ahead and close out for our second session today. First of all, I'd like to thank all of the speakers through yesterday and today, and all of the stakeholders that have provided input throughout this process. It really has been a great collaboration of national experts and many resources throughout the state. We know this is a lot to absorb today, and I want to thank everyone for your time and participation in your great questions. The presentations, again, just as a reminder, are loaded up on our website already, and the recordings from yesterday and from today will be posted later this week. We do encourage and ask that everyone continue to submit your written comments through the Carbon Neutral Buildings Roadmap website. The page is open now and will be continued to able to accept comments through August 6th. We, again, want to thank you for your time, and we hope everybody has a great evening. Thanks very much, everybody. Take care.